practitioner for Namibia's modern democracy and a statesman of note. He said Dr. Nujoma was a decisive leader who gave all that he could to ensure the freedom of Namibians. So we continue to hear far and wide, but also from friends of Namibia, including this afternoon we are joined by a very close friend of Namibia. That's the Cuban ambassador, His Excellency Sergio Vigoa de la US, the Cuba's ambassador to Namibia, to reflect on the relationship between Namibia and Cuba, but also on that personal involvement of President Nujoma. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to express my feelings.
Let's start off first with your official statement on this occasion.
Well, we known about the sadness news about the passing of His Excellency Dr. Sam Nujoma. It was really very sad news for Cuban people, Cuban government, and for all of us, because we have lost a very good friend of the Cuban government, the Cuban revolution, and we have to remember how close was Dr. Sam Nujoma from the Cuban revolution since the beginning, and also how close was the Cuban government and the Cuban revolution from the Namibian struggle against the apartheid regime. And for us is just to remember that we are not countries that are just friends. It's just who that was built during the struggle against the apartheid regime and the independence of Namibia. And we would like to express our heartfelt condolences to the government, to the people, to the friends, to the family of the founding president. And this is a feeling that we have not only from the Cuban government, but also from the Cuban people, from the Cuban residents here in Namibia, that we have a lot of residents here, and they have been in contact with us just to express their condolence also.
Mm-hmm. As we reflect, Ambassador, on that history, as you rightly pointed out, a history that has its roots with the fight for Namibians against apartheid and colonialism. Maybe if you can retrace those, why Cuba saw it important to get involved in a fight that was thousands of kilometers away. Why was it so important for Cuba to say the liberation of Namibia, the liberation of South Africa was something that was so important that you not only assisted with finance, but also assisted with the actual fighting on the ground?
Yes, it is, as you said, it's an island that is 12,000 kilometers from Namibia. But our commander-in-chief has a legacy in terms of the relationship between Cuba and Africa continent. And he said once that when we were involved in this those struggle for independence, not only for Namibia, Angola, South Africa, but so many countries from Africa, we were just paying a debt that we have with the Africans, because our nationality is conformed mainly for Africans. The Africans were the ones that first was fighting against the colonialism in Cuba. They were sending there as slaves, but they were the first that was fighting against the colonialism in Cuba. Then there was a debt that we have with the African continent. Then when we decided to come to participate in this struggle for the independence of Namibia, for the independence, the final independence of Angola at that time, and to lift the apartheid regime from South Africa, we were just doing something like it was from our heart. And I would like to remark that this friendship between Cuba and Namibia was not only during the independence struggle or after the independence struggle. It was many years before. I was remembering when the person that was here before me, talking about when the Kasinga massacre, there were many adolescents that they get orphaned after this massacre, and many of them were sent to Cuba to recover from their mental and physical wounds, but also to prepare themselves to come back to Namibia and to work in the development of the Namibia in the future.
That's right after 1978.
It was in 1978, just when the massacre of Kasinga took place. The troops of Cubans was the first one that arrived to Kasinga campment, because they were about 17 kilometers from Kasinga campment, and they were the first one that go there and defeated the South African troops. And after that, the late President Sam Nujoma and our Commander-in-Chief Fidel Castro talked about the possibility to send those young people, childs, to go to Cuba to recover from their wounds and also to prepare themselves. And there were many. At that time, I think were about 2,000 Namibians that were there, studying there for many years. They found there not only a possibility to study, but they found there also family in Cuba. And nowadays you can find many Namibians that can talk with the Cuban people as a family. And for us it's a privilege to be here as a diplomatic right now, because we feel very loved here in Namibia as a family.
So that was that particular aspect of the liberation struggle, where Namibians were sent to Cuba, and many of them, obviously, in the post-independence period, as you are pointing out, were playing a very instrumental role in many government ministries. They became doctors, they became scientists. We recall the late Dr. Abraham Yambo, who was Minister of Fisheries for a very long time, was one of those that studied in Cuba as well. But there was also this other aspect, as you are rightly mentioning, where the Cuban forces were in Angola, and they were also fighting against the South African regime, but also against UNITA at the time, that was also fighting a proxy for the United States, as we saw quite an immersement or involvement rather of global forces that were fighting in the region, using obviously the local actors at the time. Fast forward, we see Cuban forces involved in the Battle of Cuito Canavale. How would you remember that period? Because that, as you talk to many of our leaders at the time, was the battle that broke the camel's back.
Yes, indeed, Cuito Canavale was the most important battle to defeat finally the South African troops. Also, I would like to remind something. During 1975 to 1990, this was more or less the date that took place the battle for the final liberation of Angola at the time, and also the independence of Namibia. Then there were more than 300,000 Cubans that were involved in those years, and more than 2,000 Cubans died for the independence of Angola, for the independence of Namibia, and I heard once that the vice president of Namibia, His Excellency Netumbo Nandi, said once that the Cuban blood really watered the freedom of Namibia, and this is true. And the Cuito Canavale battle was the last battle of the battle that defined the possibility to sign or to put on the table to talk with the South African regime, the United States government, and also so many governments at that time that would like to talk about the possibility of independence of Namibia, South Africa, and Angola. And I can't remember. I didn't have the opportunity to participate in this battle. I was very young at that time. But I remember that many people that many Cubans that participate in this struggle, this 25 years, they said that they were very, very, very close to the SWAPO soldiers at the time, to plan soldiers at that time, because they were very brave. And then there was a mix between FAPLA, SWAPO, and the Cuban soldiers, and there was a very good mix that have the possibility to defeat it, definitely the South Africa troops and the South Africa regime in this region.
So in the post-independence period, obviously we see Namibia is free as a result of the assistance from the Cuban people and the Cuban forces. Apartheid, South Africa is also dismantled in 1994, and you have these two new governments that also come and knock on the doors of Cuba to say, we also need assistance, and especially in the medical field. Talk to us about that collaboration that has been there for years and obviously championed by Dr. Sam Nujoma and Fidel Castro and subsequent leaders of Namibia and Cuba after that.
Yes, after the independence of Namibia, Cuba have been helping Namibia in the development of human resources for the development of Namibia. I can remember that the first time that Dr. Sam Nujoma was in Cuba was in 1991. In the trip back, in the same plane with Dr. Sam Nujoma, came the first doctors that went to come and to collaborate with the system, with the health system in Namibia. There was the first doctors that came at that time. And after that, we have been bringing many doctors. There is a very old collaboration between Cuba and Namibia in regards of health, education, agriculture, sport, construction, that they have been developing during the last year. Actually, we have more than 120 collaborators working here in Namibia in the fields, especially in medicine and in construction. But during those years, not only the Cubans collaborators have been working here in Namibia, but also there have been many young Namibians that have been going to Cuba to study there, to prepare there, especially in medicine, to come back to participate in the development of Namibia. 2 years ago, there was a big graduation of 170 young Namibians that graduated from medicine and stomatology in Cuba. There was, I think it was one of the biggest graduation in Cuba from Namibia.
Mm-hmm. President Nujoma always spoke against the U.S. embargo against Cuba, and it's something that subsequent leaders have also inherited, and it has become part of the official policy of the Namibian government to speak against and the U.S. embargo, but also to give Cuba unwavering support. How instrumental do you think Dr. Nujoma has been on that front?
Well, it was definitely the best legacy, I mean, for Cubans that we have get from Dr. Sam Nujoma. He was all the time supporting the cause of Cuban against the U.S. blockade. During his terms, as he was president, in all international meetings and regional meetings, he was asking all time, asking for the lifting of the U.S. blockade against Cuba. But also, this legacy was supported by the next generation of leaders in Namibia. And that's what happened with the Hifikepunye Pohamba, with the late President Gengo, with the current President Bumba, with the President-elect Netumbo Nandi. They talk every time about the necessity of the lifting the U.S. blockade against Cuba. And that is it's a very understandable role that has been playing Namibia during the last year in all international meetings and regional meetings against the U.S. blockade and supporting the cause of the Cuban Revolution. And we really would like to appreciate this in this momentous. It's very important, the legacy of the Dr. Nujoma, to continue with this brotherhood between Cuba and Namibia.
Ambassador, any last remarks from your side?
Well, the legacy of Dr. Nujoma have to be alive. It's only to pass to eternity. Then the legacy will be just playing a very important role, not only during the time being, but also for the future. We need that this legacy will be alive and will be very important between the relationship between Cuba and Namibia. Again, I would like to extend my condolences to the government, the people, the friends, and the family of the founding president on this moment.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us this afternoon to reflect on this important relationship between Cuba and Namibia, a relationship really that was championed by our two leaders, Dr. Nujoma and Fidel Castro. Thank you so much. There was the Cuban ambassador to Namibia reflecting at this point in time the relationship between Namibia and Cuba, but mostly, as I pointed out, a relationship that was forged during the struggle for Namibia's independence, and Cuba an all-weather friend to Namibia during that period and the subsequent period of Namibia's independence till this day. We continue after this. Do stay tuned to this rolling coverage.
It is my favorite belief that when people and nations are united, striving to achieve common good for all humanity, they will always emerge victorious.